All right. Oh, wow. I'm pumped up. Sanjeev, good morning, good evening. How are you doing?
Good morning to you. Good evening to me. Definitely didn't
Yes.
expect that intense initial music to
We're
start off
ready
this.
to go now.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. Well, today on Conversations with Jack, we have Sanjeev from Leap Wallet. Sanjeev, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jack and Sisla.
Yeah.
I know this has been a long time coming. We've had multiple reschedules, but excited to finally be here.
Yeah, I can be tough to schedule with sometimes, so sorry about that. I guess maybe a good way to start off, Sanjeev, is you. I ran into you for the first time during the Terra collapse when there were a bunch of Terra projects. You guys were one of the better projects on Terra, and we funded you through the Juno Terra Relief Fund. But you've had a whole story prior to that. You guys already had a working product at that point. Do you want to tell folks a little bit more about how Leap came to be and what you guys have been building for this long?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe a bit of like personal background also before that. So I uh, got into crypto much like a lot of people as like a retail investor, trader. Bought into the highs of the 2017-18 market, sold the bottom, and like many people thought this is not for me, and left the space and
Yeah.
totally bought it for a long period of time. But then the 2019-2020 period obviously was like super exciting for the space. And the one of the most interesting things that I found was that although I was not in crypto Twitter back then, I was a lot more like into tech Twitter. It's interesting to see that crypto was becoming a lot more like mainstream. Like every week you'd go and you'd see like this amazing product designer from Apple saying that they're leaving their job to go all in on crypto, right? And so that sort of talent migration, I think more than anything else, is what got me personally excited again in crypto. And then spend a bunch of time just trying to go through the ropes, figure out how DeFi works, how NFTs work. And honestly, on one hand, I was really amazed by the tech, thought this was like absolutely amazing stuff. But on the other hand, I also found it quite shocking as to how hard these products were to use. And especially coming from like my background, when I'd spent the last like 6 odd years working in different tech startups, and these are all like consumer tech startups where literally all that we do day in and day out is just obsess about UX, obsess about consumer experience. Everything was about like NPS scores and optimizing funnels and
Oh yeah.
talking to customer support team. And this just felt
I
like a
loved it. I loved it. Like so many of us did this in Web 2, and then you get into Web 3, and everyone's like, yeah, we don't really know who our users are. We don't know how to talk to them. We don't know if they like us. Like, who knows?
yeah, we've forgotten stuff, right? Like I was like, oh,
Yeah.
what? The moment I said it, I was like, oh, I'm not sure I remember what NPS stands for.
Net promoter
But,
score.
but yeah, so coming from that background, I was like, hey, there's a huge opportunity here, right? Wallets are
Oh
a
yeah.
very important problem, and there's a huge opportunity here. So let's see what we can do. And one thing led to the other. Some friends were building on Terra, and so through them, felt that Terra was a great starting point for us. I mean, it was very apparent that the wallet problem spans across ecosystems in crypto, but felt like Terra was a great starting point for us. And this was like late 2021. So as you can imagine, Anchor, UST, all the hype back then, we sort of got a small grant from TFL to build out a proof of concept. And almost immediately, within like a month, we saw very good traction for some of the initial proof of concepts we put out. So our whole vision at that point was that we wanted to build like a super wallet for Terra, where you'd be able to do like anchor deposits from the wallet, you'd be able to do one-click liquid staking from the wallet, a whole bunch of DeFi, and people really like the concept. We got some, like I said, got some really good traction early on, and at that point, we felt, hey, this is a great starting point for us. Let's focus all of our energies on this space. We did do some digging around to see what else was happening. I think our first sort of small journey into Cosmos was we did like this 1 day research sometime, I think maybe February of last year. We said, okay, let's go see what's happening in Cosmos. By the end of the day, we were like more confused than where we started. You know what? Let's just like stick to Terra. We understand this. Let's like build here. And yeah, honestly, like we were totally pumped about Terra. The week where the depeg and the crash happened was literally the week where our mobile beta was slated to go out. Right, so we were super excited
Wow.
about that week for a whole other reason. And then yeah, obviously when the Terra depegged, it was like a big sort of, it was like a major shock for us, sort of going back and starting over moment. And that's sort of like, what led eventually to us coming into Cosmos.
Cool. Kind of a wild story. I just want to, like, when you were saying that you came into Cosmos, you guys were like, what is going on here? I think that that's a lot of people's experience with Cosmos.
Totally.
Has it being here for a while, has it gotten any easier?
Yeah, absolutely. I think now, safe to say, we understand. I still don't think I fully understand all the organizations that work in Cosmos and how they're related to each other and who's there. It's honestly, even till date, such a complicated arrangement of people and organizations. But I think over time, what we've learned to appreciate is that this is almost like a feature and not a bug, right? Like a lot of people, when they come into Cosmos, they're like, okay, where is the foundation, right? Who's actually allocating grants? And they try to look for the equivalent of a TFL or the Polygon Foundation, and you find that there's no one single entity. And obviously that has downsides in terms of how fast Cosmos is able to move, how fast you're able to secure strong relationships. But on the flip side, and that's something we really appreciated coming from Terra especially, is that there's no single point of failure. Right? And so now today, you have like 10 organizations, even if some of them decide to stop working, if there was a fallout, whatever else happened, you know that Cosmos SDK, Cosmos Tech is going to chug along, right? And I think that really to us is how we see the strength of Cosmos today.
I think that's a really good way to look at it, and that's kind of how I've always looked at it too. Like, we're here to build decentralized technology, and I think that so many of these ecosystems are just like one org, one foundation, one group of people, and Cosmos is very diverse, a lot of different folks, and by the architecture, it is inherently split apart and kind of decentralized, but we do have these bridges to talk to each other. And I think that this is the architecture that's always made the most sense to me in crypto, and coming from a Web 2 background like yourself, this is how Web 2 works too. Everyone's got their own sovereign systems, and they communicate via a common interoperability protocol, HTTP. So yeah,
absolutely. And I love the fact that, till date, Cosmos continues to throw good and bad surprises, but definitely surprises your way. Like, I saw your recent announcement about the Provenance blockchain. We got connected with them recently, and I was like, what? These guys have an $8 billion TVL, and we've I'd heard of them somewhere.
It's gone up by 2 billion in the last couple of months. They're fucking crushing. Provenance is doing a great job. I think that is the largest real world asset deployment in blockchain, period. Like, not even Ethereum mainnet has a protocol with that much AUM from traditional banks. And I think it's because of this ability to build your own system. Banks don't want to go deploy on the Wild West public internet. They want to do something controlled that they understand they're able to build a regulatory perimeter on, and then sort of venture out into the more unregulated spaces. And this is what the Cosmos SDK and IBC allows you to do, is you can build your own system that then you can interoperate with in a very measured and controlled way with the rest of the blockchain ecosystem. And I think that with Provenance, what we're seeing is that enterprises are actually starting to get this and starting to adopt the Cosmos technology, and we're very excited to partner with them to help drive that.
Absolutely. And same with us, we're just going through that learning curve of understanding how they work. For the longest time, I used to think that stable coins and speculation are probably the two product market fit for crypto. But I think real world assets is very interesting. And yeah, we also just started putting together a proposal on how we can partner with Provenance. But yeah, that is very exciting indeed.
Awesome. So you guys have some product launches lately. Elements, I do want to talk about Snaps, but I want to save it for a little bit later because that is just so exciting. The Elements SDK, you mentioned this earlier on the call. I had seen some stuff about it on Twitter. Help me understand what you guys are building there and why this is exciting for developers and for users.
For sure. Yeah. So with Elements SDK, what it is it's a easy to use SDK, which presents itself in the form of a front end widget that makes it really easy for users to get the required liquidity that they need before they can start using a particular dApp. Right? So one of the problems that is inherent to Cosmos, especially because of the app chain model, is that you have sometimes dApps built out as smart contracts on could be like chains like Osmosis, could be chains like Neutron in the future. In some cases, you're going to have dApp chains like Quasar building in, and each of them has different ways in which you would get the required base token, right? And there are again multiple ways in which users can onboard into that liquidity. Some of which could be through IBC transfers. Sometimes it could be through doing swaps within the Cosmos ecosystem. Sometimes it might have to be like a cross-chain swap from, let's say, an EVM chain. Or in some cases, it might even be like a transfer from a centralized exchange or even a fiat on-ramp. Right? So there's so many different ways to on-ramp. And today, this journey of how does a user get the required liquidity is absolutely broken. And I think this came to limelight a couple of months back when everyone started talking about how do I buy a bad kid on Stargaze, right? I have the intent, I'm an EVM user, I want to do it, but it's like a 7-8 step process for me, me being like a crypto native user, right? For a non-crypto native user, it's all the more confusing. And so when we started observing what dApps were doing, we realized everyone was trying to solve it in their own ways. Like Osmosis, for example, has a button where they have this Cardo on-ramp integrated. Stargaze almost used to have like a blog type of page where they said, hey, here are different steps, different ways in which you could get liquidity. Some of them were starting to integrate some of these solutions. But we felt that it was an important enough problem and repeatable enough that we could actually build a strong front-end solution for it and then scale that and offer it to any front-end building on Cosmos. So that's really what it is, which is that right now we've integrated Skip for IBC swaps. We've integrated Squid for cross-chain swaps, and we've integrated Cardo for on-ramp.
Nice.
So this is already a pretty powerful combo we have there. And then very soon we're going to have TFM coming in. We're going to have Wormhole. We've just started talking to Circle about potentially integrating CCTP there as well. And so the idea is just like a one-stop onboarding solution. And then dApps can sort of think about all these different modules, pick the ones that you want, don't select the ones that you don't want, and then you can completely customize the UI as well, so that the end product is like a native onboarding solution on your front end.
I mean, this is like when you want to talk about increasing your net promoter score, these are the big features that you need. And I think that for a long time in Cosmos, we've talked about IBC kind of fading into the background and enabling these user experiences that are simple single transactions that perform complex tasks. And it's really only within the last few months where we've really enabled that. And what we're seeing with all of those projects that you guys are integrating with, Squid, Skip, TFM, are toolkits for incredible user experiences that enable seamless movement of funds from a bank account to on-chain and back and forth. And I think when you combine that with Circle and CCTP, what we're seeing in Cosmos is a massive leap in the ability of the stack to deliver these user experiences. And it sounds like you guys are trying to be at the tip of that and to offer the best user experiences there. Very excited to try this out.
Absolutely.
I'm interested as to why you guys have chosen to go with this sort of white label route instead of trying to drive more usage. Like, does the Elements require like the Leap browser extension too?
That's a great question. It doesn't. So Elements works natively on like any dApp, and it works with any sort of Connect Wallet experience that you have. Today, a lot of dApps on Cosmos have Leap, but it could very well work on a dApp which only has Kepler, a dApp that only has Cosmos Station. And so the idea here very much was that here's a bunch of solutions that we're building into Leap products. Because all of the stuff that I mentioned is already in some form already there or coming into Leap natively very soon. But the idea was that Leap is not the only front end, right? Like wallets are not the only front ends that users are interacting with. And so what might happen is that we might be able to deliver great UX as long as they're within the Leap confines. But if you think about like a user journey, typically a user is actually discovering, let's say, Levana, discovering Osmosis, not through Leap, but actually maybe through like a tweet that they saw. Right? They saw maybe a YouTube video, and that's what brought them to the dApp, and that's where the journey actually begins. And so that's where we felt that a lot of dApps also don't necessarily have the bandwidth or expertise to solve these problems. It takes them a certain amount of time in the space to figure it out. And if we can offer this as a ready to go solution, it just makes like, their life so much easier. That was sort of the thought process here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, I think that those dApps are the folks that kind of inherently own that end user experience, and like giving the better tools to do it, I think is a great way to grow and to help expand Leap. Another key feature when it comes to end user adoption that works now is MetaMask Snaps. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that work and how that's supported within the Elements SDK?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually slightly different from the Elements SDK in that it's its own different thing. But yeah, honestly, firstly, me and like the rest of the team ourselves were surprised at how much, like how MetaMask, the whole MetaMask stuff blew. I mean, for some backstory here, we've actually been talking to MetaMask for a long time now. We initially spoke to them back in our Terra days, when they were sort of like, just pitching snaps to people, trying to gauge interest. And then, of course, I think their snaps development took longer than planned. We also changed our course. But then, like last quarter, we were like, hey, like, we've done a lot of things on the Leap sort of core BTC products that we had set out to do last year. So let's see, now we have some room for more experimental stuff. Maybe we can, like, go back to MetaMask. And it just so happened that it was perfect timing because they were planning to launch this quarter. So I said, okay, it's a small, easy experiment. Let's roll this out and see what happens. And yeah, it was sort of in that phase until about maybe 6 or so weeks back when we put out an initial tweet saying that, like, we're going to be integrating snaps and bringing that to Cosmos. And that just blew up, right? And in the next couple of days, we had all kinds of dApps, like, dApps that had been in the ecosystem for a long time, builders who were just starting out. Every single person was like, reaching out to us. And at that point in time, I think if you had asked people, MetaMask integration was like a top 3 problem for like most builders.
Oh yeah.
And honestly, that we knew it was important, but just how important it was something that it sort of like, exposed us to for the first time. And that's when we decided, okay, if this is so important to the ecosystem, then let's do it well. So then we deployed a few more resources internally on it. We decided to build a bunch of like, other middleware that we need to build a good experience. And yeah, it's only been like 10 days since launch, and we I think have like upwards of like 10 dApps that have integrated Snap so far.
That's huge. That's great adoption.
Yeah. The one thing I will say though, and it's something we are also sort of waiting to see how it plays out, is I don't think it's a silver bullet in the way that some people thought of it, that, hey, I'm going to integrate MetaMask and then like, these 20 million users are suddenly going to start using my dApp. Obviously, it's not that. It's just made it easier for these 20 million users of MetaMask to use your product. And it definitely has removed a huge piece of onboarding friction, but it's still like, experimental software. It's still early software. So even we are actually very curious, and I'm going to go back to MetaMask this week asking them if they have some data on how many users have actually like used it. Because again, the goal here is not for Cosmos native users to use this. It's actually for like, non-Cosmos native.
I think that with Wormhole launching, Hyperlane coming, Axelar obviously already existent, there's a couple of different IBC solutions over to Ethereum. The bridging story in Cosmos from EVM chains has improved enough where bringing those users over now is actually viable in a way it hasn't been in the past. And the combination of that plus snaps is going to take a little while to kind of play out. And hopefully it gives us as an ecosystem the time to like shake out some of those bugs in that early software, so that when the huge mass of Ethereum users comes over to check it out, they get a great experience here.
Absolutely. I don't know if you saw the recent, like, I don't know if it was a tweet or a message on these Telegram groups where Jonathan from Levana, he had posted like, this, I think it was like a 20 or 25 step process saying that here's what a new Levana user has to do, right, before they can actually make a trade. And actually going through that, I completely understand that these are all still points of friction, but it was great to see that when we looked at that, we realized that we actually have a line of sight on solving like most of them. And I think, like you said, there's still some work to be done. We are not fully there yet, but it almost seems like, within 3 to 6 months, a lot of these pieces, right, in terms of how do we reduce the need for, let's say, seed phrase based wallets? How do we make it easier to onboard liquidity from whether it's centralized exchanges or other ecosystems? How do we remove the need to actually have a native wallet? Right? How do we solve this issue of like being able to pay gas in whatever token you want? So there's multiple pieces here. And I think all of these are kind of individually getting built. And in the next 3 to 6 months, we'll actually see like, dApps starting to combine these. And that's sort of like, then even the story for us in terms of elements and MetaMask snaps and like, all of that sort of fits into that, like, onboarding narrative.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Naresh giving you guys a shout out. Permissionless browser, snaps, elements, so much more. Yes, Leap is crushing it. Yeah, I think we've talked a bit about user acquisition, but I think that that's the big topic of discussion right now amongst most teams is like, where are the users? And I think that the stuff we're talking about here is going to be critical into bringing those folks in for the next stage of growth here.
Absolutely. Although I feel like, one of the common, almost like misconceptions in the space, right, is that everyone talks about where are the consumer applications, right, or who's building the consumer application. But honestly, the fact of the matter also is that consumer applications don't take off in silos, right? I mean, there is a huge element of like the macro environment, right? Like today, we're talking about an environment where you have like super low risk-free rate, your risk appetite is really low. And so even if some of these applications got built today, they may not take off, right? So I mean, a lot of times people have asked us that, what if, why don't you guys build like a Venmo-like experience for like a one-click Venmo, like, transfers to your friends within Cosmos? And sure, we may be able to build it from a technical perspective, but the question that we're asking ourselves is there enough demand today for an application like this, versus we actually spend this time building infra, right? Like we're in a very typical, hopefully end of the bear cycle, but very typical like bear bull cycle at this point of time. And this is the time that we want to heads down, focus on solving some of these long-standing UX issues that hopefully will unlock a lot of the consumer application demand that will happen in the next cycle.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, Sanjeev, this has been great getting to learn a little bit more about Leap. Any last topics before we wrap up here?
No, I think we've covered like a bunch of interesting stuff that's coming down the road. Like, of course, what I do want to mention is we also have our B2C wallets, and that's still at the heart of our business. But I think in the last, as I mentioned, the last quarter especially, we realized that we've done a lot of stuff that we set out to do. We have more room on our roadmap. So that's where some of this B2B2C stuff is sort of coming out right now, which are basically new front ends which sort of still use like Leap's tech, but hosted on other dApps essentially. Another interesting piece that we are just starting to work on is the idea of like a wallet SDK. It's something that we tested out a little bit with some of our Snaps developers. But again, the idea there is, what if people could natively view their balances, view their activity, do swaps, do transfers, but do all of that without even requiring a wallet, right? Without requiring you to open like Leap's interface. What if you could do that natively within the dApp experience itself? And that couples very well with solutions like, let's say Capsule. I think you were the one connected me to Capsule.
Yeah, we did connect you with Capsule. Yeah, I think that, Friend Tech showed the power of that kind of onboarding experience for users. And I think that we're likely to see that as the primary vector for onboarding new users in the next market. I am a big Ledger user. I think it's extremely important to do self-custody, but it is hard. It's not easy. And I think for just trying out a dApp, having to generate a key and a new account for that's a huge UX blocker. When we're talking about sort of like traditional Web 2 tools, when you think about the onboarding experience as like a series of steps, you can sort of track how far users get in that flow before they drop off and calculate a drop-off rate for each step. That's a step where, all of the drop-off analysis I've seen for onboarding for Web3 apps, like that's the step where you lose by far the most users. And like, this is the problem that Capsule and some of these other MPC solutions are solving. And I think it's going to go a long way towards making onboarding a lot easier.
Absolutely. But yeah, that's sort of how some of these pieces stitch together for us.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Sanjeev, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you, Sisla and the OmniFlix team for hosting. I see some folks saying we don't talk enough about OmniFlix on the OmniFlix channel. I think that we've done at least one Sisla show in the past, but maybe we need to do another Jack and Sisla show to talk about OmniFlix again. So thank you again for hosting this week. Thank you, Sanjeev and the Leap team. And we will see you guys online and see you guys next week with some with another interview. Everyone have a great one. Thank you very much.